Hello, listeners, and welcome to Privacy Chats with Rachel and John, a podcast for privacy professionals and enthusiasts alike. I'm Rachel.
And I'm John. Yeah, we're goofing that one up. It's okay. And we're your hosts. Okay, let's get into this episode. So, Rachel, have you ever been with a group of friends and someone that you're with mentions that, some sort of an unusual, obscure item, and then you see advertisements for that very same item on your phone just minutes later?
Yeah, more than once. And it doesn't help that, when I'm in a circle with people that know that I work in tech, all the eyes kind of go toward me and going, "What's going on, Rachel?" There's already like an assumption that they think the phone is, listening to them. And they say, "Oh, this ad is mysteriously applicable to the thing I was just talking about."
Right, and wanting you to answer it. I think for most people, it's such a common occurrence because I've talked to a lot of people about this recently because of preparing for this episode. That I think that people come to the conclusion that's not really even a question anymore. It's a conclusion
Mhm.
that our phones are listening to us, and that some company out there, and we'll figure out which ones it are, maybe, are mining our conversations for targeted advertising. So, like the compelling question for this episode is, are our phones listening to us?
Yes. And I take it you have some, good findings to share considering the subject of this episode is this very question. But I want to start with my input, which is I think we're a little bit more predictable than we like to think, right? And so I think our digital footprint honestly leaves behind some good material that we might just default to thinking they can only get from hearing us talk.
Yeah.
But again, that's me speculating, but I'm interested to hear what the consensus is on your end. Are our phones listening to us?
So I don't. I mean, I like your point about the digital footprint. So we're going to get into some of that. I don't think you're going to like my answer to your questions if our phones are listening to us, because my answer is a little bit of yes, a little bit of no. It's complicated, and some of it is just an I don't know. So I've got four answers to your question right there.
Classic. Well, can you clarify a little bit?
Sure. Yes. So let's get into it. But this one is getting very close to home for us. So before we get into this, I really want to be very purposeful about the sources of information that we're going to cover in this episode. You and I both work for a large technology company. Like you already said, people are going to assume that we're talking about some knowledge that we have from inside of our company or the industry or our roles, or we've got some inside scoop. So whether or not we do or not, which isn't anything that we're going to talk about, but I want to be clear in this episode, we're not talking about any of that. This episode started with a question that somebody asked me, like this, if this is happening. I went out to the internet. I've got the same Google or other search engines as everyone else does, and that's all I've got here. So I'm going to be very purposeful about talking about my sources in this episode. And also, the other thing just to point out is I'm going to be careful about not naming companies. So it's obvious that I'm not going to name the company that I work for, but if I'm going to do that, I'm also not going to name the other companies that are going to show up. So I'm going to use generic names for the companies. So I just want to be very clear about that. I know we have a disclaimer at the end, but this one, I wanted to be very clear about that. So
Yeah, valid. I think either way, it'll probably save perhaps me and our listeners some hours of reading to get the scoop that you've collected anyway. So what do you
yeah.
got?
Okay, so the first source that I found was very interesting. It was an interview that was posted on YouTube. It was with a doctor. I hope I don't get her name wrong, but I think her name was Mari Aitken. She was an ethics research fellow with the Alan Turing Institute in London. And her opinion about this question was that our phones are probably not listening for advertising purposes because they don't need to. They have all of the information that they need because of the advert or the monitoring that they're doing of our browsing and other activity. So they really don't need that extra information from our conversations. She did acknowledge that the virtual assistants, when you say, hey Bob, or whatever those things are,
Mhm.
they're listening for specific prompts. But so if your phone is going to respond when you say hey something to it, it has to be listening for you to say that. So there is that. It is doing that listening. But Dr. Aiken indicated that most of the advertising data about us it's gleaned from our own browsing history, and then inferences that are made about things like who we are, who we're connected with on social media, where we are, what are our demographics, our age, gender. There's so much information about us that's out there that's That's what our advertising is based on.
Yeah, so she's essentially acknowledging through this research that our phones are listening to us, but there is still that question about what they're listening to and what they do with what they hear or that data they collect.
Yeah, agreed. It's a much more complicated thing than yes or no, which goes into that was one of my answers. It's
Yeah,
complicated.
yeah, true. That makes sense. But how do we explain all of the anecdotal scenarios that, maybe outside of academic research that what we can verify, like the connections we make when we seem to say something that pops up in an ad a matter of hours later?
Yeah, so let's look at some of the other sources that I was able to find, and I'm going to use Reddit here as one. And I'm just to be clear, I'm not claiming that Reddit is a very reliable source in the world, or let's use it for what it is. But I
Mhm.
did find an interesting thread that was there, and the thread was called "No Stupid Questions," and it posed the question: Do phones actually listen in on what people are talking about? So that's exactly what we're talking about here. And the original poster uh, of this question kind of commented that he or she, I'm not sure who they were, was with a friend, and they got a shelf who had just gotten a shelf from IKEA. Um, I think it's safe to name that company because it's not related to what we're talking about.
Sure. I hope they're not
Right,
mining
right,
conversational
right.
information.
So, yeah, from our shelves. Anyway, so they got a shelf from IKEA, and this person was helping them to build it. And they talked about this shelf as they were building it, but they didn't use the phone to look up any information. But this very specifically said that the phone was in their pocket the whole time. And then
Mhm.
once they finished with this, putting this shelf together, this person sat down and checked their social media. And the first advertisement they saw was for a shelf from IKEA. And and then they kept scrolling, and there was other advertisements about furniture. So somehow advertising knew something, that this person was interested in furniture. And of course they thought it was because of this conversation that they had, or the
Yeah.
activity that they're just engaged in.
Yeah, well, I'm sure for a lot of reasons that was a popular post, and anyone that's used Reddit knows that there's no shortage of opinions going on in response on that site. So it's kind of the whole purpose of the app.
Yeah, agreed. So then I did get into some interesting conversation, and it's not reliable because you don't know who these people are that are saying these things. But I read through all of the comments, and there were a lot, but I pulled out four key things from the comments that were in there. The first was about confirmation bias. So as we said, a lot of people think that this already happens. So if you think it happens, and then you see evidence that it might be happening, it just kind of confirms that. Like, yeah, I knew that they were listening to me.
Mhm.
But that what somebody was saying was maybe you were going to see advertisements about furniture anyway. So that was one of the thoughts. The second was that could have inferred that you were with a person who recently purchased an item from IKEA and then targeted you because of that. So they have that data about that person. They know you're together. So they're sharing their location. You're sharing your location. They can infer that you're together, and just connect you with that and say, hey, this person's with a person who buys shelves at IKEA. They must
Mhm.
want to do that too. So that's plausible. The third suggestion, I'm not so sure about this one, but they said, was there a search, an internet search about this purchase, maybe for assembly instructions or something like that, that happened on the same network that your phone was connected to, while you're on your friend's Wi-Fi, and they're able to connect that you're coming from the same place as this search that happened, and connect you that way. I'm not so sure about that one.
Mhm.
The last one was a very specific comment, and I'm just going to read the quote in this particular comment. And it said, "It's more likely that your phone detected it was in proximity to a number of other people or phones and grouped them into a social circle, and that someone in that social circle did express interest in the thing, like in this case, the IKEA shelf, or visit a site, and then tied you together that way." So kind of similar to one of the previous things I said. So though, like, those aren't listening, but it's figuring out
Yeah.
that you have an interest in the
It's
shelf through
it's
other.
yeah, it's tying inferences based on, relationships using the technology that's either in the vicinity or they're interacting in some way. I don't, I think the confirmation bias is a huge one that also plays into the rest of the three, even if it does have something to do with, technology using these probabilistic, I would say, models to figure out which ads are best serviced where, and just this much more data was enough to confirm that, okay, it's very likely
Right.
that someone else, I don't know, not that they know you're building a shelf, but someone else bought it. Okay, so someone in their network might be interested in it as well, right? Like these, the more signals you have, the more powerful it gets. So some parts of my mind, caused me to think that maybe multiple events that you just listed could go on in the same scenario. You had talked about the Google search example, and that's actually been a common anecdote just running into my life where we've actually been able to draw back and use that as a conclusion in some situations. I don't know about this IKEA shelf building situation, but definitely like the Google searches are a pretty powerful one. And then it's almost annoying to see it after you've maybe bought the item or at other apps, right? But yeah, it could have been machine learning all along, right? Maybe not in the directly deterministic, like I say
Yeah.
something, it's heard, I share an ad for it, but kind of everything else around it put together.
Yeah, it's clearly it's a much bigger ecosystem there. So that was like the Reddit thread was talking about what some people had to say, but to your point about machine learning, we've dedicated several episodes to artificial intelligence, machine learning. So I figured what do those guys have to say? Is it
Yeah.
those guys? How do you refer to AI?
ChatGPT as a person, I don't know. I
Yeah,
know people talk to them conversationally, so it's safe to
right. Yeah.
personify.
That's true. Yeah, we should come up with names for it. Anyway, so I went to ChatGPT, very specifically, and the prompt that I typed in was, "Why do I see ads for things I talk about?" Very simple prompt, and it came back with a couple of things. It started off saying, "So seeing ads for things you talk about can feel unsettling." So it recognizes that it's not such a good thing,
Oh,
but it
empathetic.
often, I know, yeah, yes, right. Let's personify it. But it often has less to do with your device actively listening to you and more to do with how modern advertising algorithms work. And then it offered a breakdown. And I'm not going to read all of this, but the first thing was about behavioral tracking. So they're, like we talked about before, they're tracking your activity, the websites you visit, all of that stuff. The second one was cross-device tracking. And that said, if you're logged into the same account, whether different browsers or social media companies or different places, companies that you buy things from, on multiple devices, those platforms and apps can sync your activity. So you do something on your phone, then you go to your laptop, and you'll see advertisements on your laptop for something that you just did on your phone. The third one is what we mentioned from, I think, Dr. Mari, or maybe one of the things from Reddit, the Reddit article, is shared interests in social circles that advertises target not just individuals, but the groups that you're associated with. So if someone close to you searches for purchases or something, they think that you're connected to that also. It also brought up confirmation bias. So ChatGPT was recognizing the same thing we already talked about. Um, the next one was it said voice data, and it said sometimes.
Ooh.
And I'm going to read exactly what it said. This is again from ChatGPT. So this is a very specific quote. It said, "While it's rare, some apps with microphone access could use your voice data for targeting purposes. Most major platforms deny actively listening to conversations for ad purposes. However, voice interactions with smart assistants could feed into your ad profile indirectly."
Mm.
So
Well, it's first of all, it seems like our friend here, ChatGPT, definitely considered the Reddit post that you came across and maybe even Mari's research, um,
maybe,
through its magical tokenization of words and
sure.
sources and spitting them back to us. I love that. But I'm curious if you tried this with any other AI agents and if they would have returned the same result, especially with that last one, because that wasn't common across the research and that Reddit post you had shared with us.
Yeah, so I put the exact same prompt just into the Google AI thing. So just regular Google, and it, nowadays it comes up with, Google AI stuff in the very top. And it came up with a few things. The first was ad algorithms. And it said that algorithms analyze your online activity, interests, interactions to target ads. Um, so that was the first one. The second was demographics, which is kind of, we already talked about social circles, that advertisers might assume you're interested in similar things as people with similar demographics. So I guess that's not social circles, but it's, you're a certain gender, certain age, certain place that you live. So you're probably going to like those things because all people who are that gender and that age
We tend
live
to,
there.
yeah, common interest based on those,
Yeah,
maybe not
exactly.
deterministically based on one or the other, but
Yeah,
in statistically speaking.
right. The next one I talked about was geo-targeting, so which I think is similar to the demographics part, but if you're in a geographic location that's being targeted for a specific ad campaign, so one of the examples that it offered is if you walk by a pet store while they're running a promotion for cat food or something, you might see ads for cat food, and presumably that's going to happen whether you own a cat or not.
Yeah.
Um, Although I don't own cats, and I don't think I've ever seen ads for cat food, but. Um, you probably see them all the time because we
All the
often see
time.
cats behind you there. Yeah. The next one was third-party data set. So it said you might be in a third-party data set for a specific category, and I think it's the same. Like you own cats, so you're in a category for that you're a pet owner, which is why you probably see advertisements for cat food.
Yeah.
Um, but there was one in particular that really stood out to me, and I'm gonna, read this is a quote from Google AI's, response to my prompt, and it said some mobile game apps use software to identify, excuse me, to identify audio signals in TV ads and shows. This information can be used for ad targeting. So this doesn't necessarily specifically say that your phone is listening to you, but it says that it's listening for audio signals from your environment. And, I would argue that you can't listen for audio signals that are coming from around you without listening to everything that's happening, including what you're saying.
Yeah. Interesting. So this is also the second AI driven response that's brought up, directly some sort of voice collection happening in some circumstance where, we could catch it. Whereas some of the other posts and researchers didn't necessarily bring this one up. I
Right.
remember hearing, and I won't get into the details because there's a lot of other awesome stories in this episode, but I do remember years ago hearing about some issues with like smart TVs and how they were, looking for the command based words that turn on your TV or do something with the remote. And there was some issues with it just like always being on, which meant the companies were essentially collecting that data.
Right.
It doesn't matter if they weren't intending to use it for the purpose. The lack of disclosure was really the big problem. So I wonder if that's what they're maybe pulling from here. But I don't know. Worth verifying anyway because it is coming from an AI agent, right?
Yeah, actually, hold on to that thought for a minute here, Rachel, because I think we're going to come back to something that's very close to what you're talking about there. And so this response to the prompt that came from Google I decided to go deeper into that rabbit hole, and it brought me to an article that was published in Vox. Now, I don't really like to use old information in this podcast,
Mhm.
but the information, this was an article published in Vox in 2018, so it's quite a long time ago. But it was really interesting, so I decided to kind of go deeper into that.
I hear you.
Um,
I mean, it does feel like forever ago, but like I said, but even the instance I was thinking of just now was not recent per se, but it was
yeah.
as recent as smart TVs get.
Well, and I think they could be related. So the first part of this Vox article, it cited an article from the New York Times, obviously back in the same era, uh, the 2018s or before, obviously. And it said that this is a quote from this New York Times. Actually, I'm not sure if this is a quote from the Times article or a quote from the Vox article, maybe quoting the Times.
Yeah.
Um, but it said that this is the quote, that hundreds of mobile game apps are using software from a startup called, I'm not going to say the name of the company because we said that we wouldn't. But it's using software from this startup, which can detail what people watch by identifying audio signals in TV ads and shows, sometimes even matching that information with the places people visit and the movies that they see. So that was the allegation in the news article. So I took that and I went to the website for the company whose name I didn't mention, which said, although if anyone wants to know this, we're going to publish all of these sources. So
Yeah, all the links anyway.
I'm just not going to say the
Proceed at
name
your own
out loud.
risk.
Exactly, right. So lawyers come at me like, I didn't say it. Um, anyway, so I went to this company's website, and what it said there is with automated content recognition, AECR technology, embedded in tens of millions of smart TVs and TV chipsets, this company understands what programming and advertising people watch on TV. Brands harness this granular audience data to optimize advertising campaigns across linear TV, streaming TV, and digital. So I was curious about what is this company doing with our data and how are they, honoring our privacy. So we've talked about this a lot. So let's see how our listeners would do with this one. Where would we find information about what this company is doing with our data?
Do, 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 do. Oh, it's funny. No, I would say their privacy notice. I would hope. I would hope.
Yes, the privacy notice. So I went to that. So they had one. So yes, if you're interested about what are people doing with your data, read the privacy notice. So I found a couple of interesting things. The first was a statement in the privacy notice from this company that said, but again, none of that data is identifiable to an individual. And that
Mm.
bothered me because I was like, again, I don't think I read that before. And I went back and I read it. So I'm like,
This is what
anyway,
happens when you put a privacy professional in front of a privacy notice, right?
actually reading it. Right. Anyway, later in the policy, and this is a different quote from the policy, it said that you can make a request to opt out of the sale by us of any personal information we have related to you.
The-
Well, if you haven't collected anything, what am I opting out
yeah,
of?
this is getting circular, but not even in a logical way. Fast. It just sounds like gaslighting. Like, what do you mean? We don't host
Yeah,
data about you. It's not about you, but like if it were, then you could opt out of using it.
right. Yeah, exactly. So the next thing that they said, oh, I'm losing my screen here. Okay. The policy also said that all data collected by us is associated with a household as opposed to an individual, and all data is associated to the IP address of that household.
Hmm. Do you
Very
think this
specific.
is their way of skirting around the rules for the formal collection of personal data?
Yeah, I mean that definitely came to mind when I was reading this, and like you and I have discussed a number of times, a lot of the privacy regulations about personal data, or it's often called PII, or personally identifiable information, is generally identified as being, or it's defined as being data that's about a person, or like in
Mm.
Europe about a natural human. Um, and if this company is choosing to or saying that they're collecting data about households and not people, then I wonder if they've kind of found a loophole around this collecting data about people thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
Interesting.
yeah, it bothered me a little bit, but anyway,
I don't love
let's
it
go
either,
back to
but
the
what else?
yeah.
What else do you have?
Well, I want to go back to the Vox article. Like I said it was old, but there's still some good stuff there. Um, so the second thing that I I guess I liked or found interesting was an article they cited from Wired magazine, which is also from 2018, and it was titled, some social media company uh, um, not listening through your phone. It doesn't have to by an author. So this article basically says what the title indicates, that this company is not listening to your phone because it doesn't have to, and it kind of supports that claim in the title, um, using measurements of the sheer volume of data that would be generated and the impact on the performance of our phones was really happening. So basically it says, if this company was listening to you, imagine the sheer volume of data that it would have to collect and process, and also your phone is processing it. So like your phone's performance would be horrible,
Mhm.
because of that. So basically they're not doing that because it would be very expensive for them to try.
Yeah.
um, there was also an interesting citation from a BuzzFeed article, again about a social media company, which was patenting technology that can predict your future location based on your location data and that of others. So it's kind of looking at all people and where they are,
Mhm.
and predicting where you as an individual is going to be. Although a spokesperson for that company at that time said that their filing a patent shouldn't be taken as an indication of future plans. So we've figured out how to do this, but it doesn't
We
necessarily mean
just
that we're
wanted to
going
own
to.
how to do it. We don't want to do anything
Right.
with it.
Yeah. But it speaks to the capabilities that either some of these companies have or they're pursuing.
Mhm.
And it also cited, again, the Vox article, it cited a different article from gizmodo.com, about a different patent that was filed by a technology company that could connect people through detection or an analysis, I guess, of dust or scratches in the camera lenses across different photographs.
Yeah, I vaguely remember reading this one. I think when it came out, it was like you take a photo, say John takes a photo and you send it to me. They can connect it to us because they know that picture was taken on your phone from the little patterns in the actual the screen that
Yeah.
is in between the actual camera sensor and obviously the environment and the light hitting it, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. So, like, if they hadn't connected that you and I are friends, then now they will because they say, "Whoa, she's looking at pictures that were taken on John's phone, and I know that's
Yeah.
John's phone because of like dust or scratches, it seems."
It is
But
like a lot though. Like that the length you go to make that connection is
yeah,
probably much easier if you just like look at our, social media, maybe like see us as friends or
that's
something
true.
somewhere or
Yeah.
the same location, the same place, same time.
Yeah, that's true. And again, just to say that same company, they cautioned against coming up with a conclusion that they're going to do something. We're not actually going to connect you. They're not necessarily going to do something with technology just because they filed for patents. So
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we went a long way from that Vox article, and I'm gonna remove my cat from the desk. There. What else do you have to share?
So let's see. Let's get away from the Vox article. So I did find a different. It was a YouTube channel called Mind Blowing Conspiracy Theories.
Ooh,
This
promising.
I don't know. It was actually quite interesting. So it was on YouTube, made some interesting claims. So at the beginning, it was really about how technology companies are leveraging data from our cameras, both the regular camera and the infrared camera that are on our phones. And like they talked a lot about like desires or plans or something that they attributed to a particular social media company to track your eye movements in relation to what you're watching on the screen. So if you
Mm,
see advertisements, yeah, I guess just knowing what you're looking at on the screen.
yeah.
But we're really talking about microphones in this episode, so I'm not going to go into too deep into what the cameras are doing. But the same YouTube episode made a claim that a particular music streaming app is investing in emotion tracking technology that can analyze your voice and recommend songs to you based on your emotional state.
Hmm.
Which and I but my interpretation about that was it wasn't listening to your emotional state when you're talking to the app. It just is listening to you just in general and like, oh, Rachel is sad. And
Yeah.
and then when you
Rachel's
open the
frustrated.
app,
I'm going, ugh, when
yeah,
they hear me.
exactly. Right. So it claimed that the app could identify. Oh, wait. So yeah, so that's the emotional state. It also claimed that they could identify things if you're alone or if you're like a work setting or at a party, just by listening to ambient sounds and then recommending music to you based on that vibe. So
Hmm.
in my mind, if they're listening for ambient sounds, they could definitely hear other things like what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Conversations. Why not? Well, I mean, I see the vision, I guess. I'm
Yeah.
always looking for a good mood playlist, but this kind of reminds me of that book I keep plugging here on this podcast. It's called Atlas of AI, and it has a whole chapter dedicated to talking about the challenges of successful implementation of what they're calling affect detection or recognition. Basically that your emotional state. Emotion's kind of like a loaded like term. I think everyone there is a consensus, but like technically speaking, it's actually very hard to reliably figure out what people are thinking purely based on their facial expressions, just as one thing. I know we're talking about
Yeah.
voice, but this has a relationship with it. And they do talk about
Sure.
different input sources. So I highly recommend that if anyone, has heard me say it over and over again, they're still not making the purchase, like read that book. It's awesome. I think it sparks a lot of memories about that chapter. I'm talking about this one right now.
Okay, so I do remember your last plug, and I did buy the book, so I own it. I haven't
It's on
read
the
it, but
shelf collecting
it's
dust.
on the
No.
shelf. I do that all the time. I was like, oh, that sounds great, and I buy the book. I just don't have time, so I'll try it. But I'm also wondering, like, have you figured out a way to get kickbacks from this podcast? And
I don't
you're,
know. I should at this point. This is like number 2 or 3, and it's
oh,
only gonna
okay,
grow.
yeah, because if I remember correctly, you were kind of you kept mentioning Birkenstocks in episodes like a while ago.
Yeah, I'm like, okay,
You know,
gosh, you
you,
get you
you
a get you a
yeah.
partnership.
I know. Okay, let's get back on track. So, So we're still talking about the conspiracy theory YouTube channel that I
Mhm.
listen to. So overall, it was an interesting listen. It was the whole thing was about 45 minutes long, and as the title suggests, it was really about conspiracy theory. So there was a lot of like they want to type of language that it was a lot of hyperbole, I would call it.
Mhm.
It was thought provoking. But it also did get into kind of later on in the episode uh, a lot of discussion about the mass collection of data and this is my own term that I would describe as this societal apathy that this is happening, that people
Yeah.
just don't seem to pay attention to it. Um, so I don't think that the mass collection of data is a conspiracy theory because I really think that that is happening. Um,
Mhm.
but what this episode was talking about was about the nefarious intent behind it, like, oh, these big companies, they're out to get us. I think that's conspiracy theory material. It's not,
Yeah.
trying to attribute a reason behind why it's happening to something nefarious. I'm not ready to make that leap just yet. But so that was that. And then the last part of this episode got into a lot of the pitfalls of AI, and we've had a couple of conversations about that. And at the very end, the podcaster, the presenter, his name is Shane Dawson. He offered this quote that kind of stood out to me. He said that all we can do is hope for some sort of regulations to come, but by the time they come, it will probably be too late.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Because we'll advocate for, responsible legislation on here
Yeah,
throughout our episodes. But I don't disagree. Like sometimes it is too late. We have to learn about what these harms are.
yeah,
It's a very interesting still take on that entire episode. So kudos to, the presenter of that one. But we've covered a lot of sources here, and you're calling the last one a hyperbole a little bit, because
yeah.
in the one before that was a pretty old article. So if we're
Mhm.
gonna be real journalists here, what other better sources, I guess, maybe more to the point.
Yes. Okay, good. I mean, thanks for keeping us straight. So, I did find a USA Today article. So this was from June 2024, so it's not too long ago. And it was titled "How to Stop Some Internet Browser Company from Listening to Your Every Word." And the article very specifically reported that a hidden feature in your browser account is snatching up audio recordings from your web and app activity, interactions with your digital assistants, and more. So that was kind of confirming that this is happening. It also reported that this browser company says that they're only listening in for commands and to boost marketing efforts. I'm going to read that again. Says that they're only listening in for commands and to boost marketing efforts. But this breach of your privacy could lead to way more significant problems. And then it goes into most of the rest of the article is providing instructions about modifying the settings on this company's app to manage your data collection.
Yeah, that quote is interesting because there's two things going on there. You have the listening for commands and to boost marketing efforts. So is it saying that they're doing both? That they're not intentionally, like, I'm it's a
Yeah,
little confusing.
well, I don't think it's confusing at all. I think that that's what they're saying, that we're listening for those
Interesting.
commands. I mean, that's
And
what it's and to boost marketing efforts. So I was kind of shocked. And to be clear, I'm quoting the article here, which says it's citing the company. So
mhm,
I didn't go back and ask the company that directly. Like we're
yeah.
not we're not real journalists. We just play them in this podcast. So I don't go back and check all these companies and say, I'm doing a story. Although, maybe we'll get there someday.
Yeah, no, that's a good find. I might go back in there and read myself because my opinion is usually that one of the things is definitely happening for a lot of companies, right? They're listening to optimize the user experience, deliver a
Yeah.
product, and that the advertising case is something that is kept separate, that perhaps on the basis of consent is happening in some places. But I don't make that as a blanket exception at all. Again, I wouldn't be that surprised if they were. And a lot of the information you're sharing is either confirming that or making me raise my eyebrows, which is signal for a
Mhm.
good episode. What else do you have?
So also there was another article I found from Forbes, This was from December 2023, so I'm going to say it's a little bit less than a year ago. We're recording this at the end of November. And it was titled How to Stop Your Phone from Listening to You. And here's a quote from that article that said that these companies collect so much data, it's easy for them to know what you want before you even work it out. They can see what your friends search for on the internet. So even if you didn't type in the words, you could still receive an ad for the item that you both discussed.
Yeah. So, supporting that very first research article you brought up with Dr. Mari, um, essentially they don't need to because they have enough information. Then a couple articles after that seem to suggest this as well.
Yeah, but it's like the fact that, we're concerned that they're listening to us, but, what this is suggesting is they don't need to listen to us because they already know so much more about us than what they would hear,
Yeah.
which I think it's a little disconcerting.
Yeah. Like it does, is the mechanism, the source, the method, the issue here,
Yeah.
or is it the outcome?
Right. Yeah, agreed. Because I think we're worried about the outcome, but there's more that's happening that um other sources. So I found another article from 404 Media, which was also from December 2023. I didn't actually get to read the article because it was a paywall and I wasn't
Ugh.
willing to forego over
Yeah.
money for it.
We need partnerships so we can afford to go past these paywalls.
I know, right? But anyway, I was able to see the headline. And so the headline was titled "Marketing Company Claims That It Actually Is Listening to your phone and smart speakers to target ads." So the title of this article says that it's happening, and then there was a little teaser that I was able to read, wanting to make me pay for the paywall thing, which I didn't. But the teaser said, what would it mean for your business if you could target potential clients who are actively discussing their needs for your services in their day-to-day conversations? Then it says, no, it's not a Black Mirror episode. It's voice data and says the name of a company has the capabilities to use it to your business advantage.
No, there we go. It's like we have a record running here with Black Mirror episode references, or what we've observed there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's come up now in at least 3 or 4 episodes that we've done. So I think maybe we're destined to write an episode of Black Mirror. So if those
Let's
people are
hope.
listening, call us.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in the teaser that I was able to read, it did name the marketing company, which again, I said I'm not going to name them here. But I went to the marketing company's website to see what I could learn. So
Yeah. And what'd you find out?
So there was an announcement which was dated from September 2024. So, there was a lot of time passed because what I was reading was from I think from December 2023. But anyway, there was an announcement that was dated September 2024 that said it was in response to, and this is a quote, reports about discontinued active listening product. And the announcement said, this is quite lengthy. I'm just going to read little snippets from it. Um, but it said, as we stated before, we have never listened to any conversations nor had access to anything beyond third-party aggregated information. But then it said the information referenced in recent stories is based on outdated materials for a product that we no longer sell. And then says the product never listened to customers. It has long been discontinued to avoid a misperception. So they're saying that people thought that this thing was listening, but it wasn't. But because they thought it was, we just continued using it. Another part of the same announcement said that advertising data based on voice and other data is collected by these platforms and devices under the terms and conditions provided by those apps and accepted by the users. This data can then be sold to third-party companies and converted into anonymized information for advertisers. This anonymized data is then resold on numerous advertising platform companies.
It's not super convincing, right? If this is a denial.
Yeah, agreed. So I think they've left themselves a lot of wiggle room. So like
Mhm.
basically they're saying we're not doing it, but kind of like if we are, well, we told you that we were going to do
Yeah,
it. So
I do. It makes me wonder what this would look like in like a court scenario. Surely there's people that would object to this through the judicial system, and I wonder where this type of statement gets this company.
yeah, I think that there's a lot, and I didn't get to do very specific case law research into this. But I did find a couple of articles from the Washington Post
Mm,
separately in July and September of 2023 that reported about lawsuits against a couple of large technology companies. Again, I'm not going to
mm.
name them. Um,
Yeah.
so
Homework for you later if you go and do that case search, because that would, again, that would be prime for a whole other episode, I think.
yeah, it could be. It would be actually interesting to do that case search. So we'll see. I'll see if I can fit it into my schedule. But one of these lawsuits that was referenced in these articles in the Washington Post was about. Oh, my battery is about to go. I need to plug in my laptop. Sorry, hang on.
Go for it.
Is this
I
gonna
can
be
pause
a
it. Interesting. So when the recording stopped, it hid you from my screen. Very interesting. So the recording is going on, but like that's why I
okay?
thought I lost you.
Okay.
Bloopers.
I know bloopers. Okay, so so I'm just going to back you a bit. One of the lawsuits referenced in these articles was about virtual assistants false accept. And my understanding of that is when you say, hey, insert virtual assistant name. When you say
Mm.
that, is a false accept is when it interprets something else and says, oh, I think you said, hey, Bob, and then starts recording, but you actually didn't say that right trigger word.
I've heard of that too, and it's still a non-consensual collection of data in my point of view, but it does at least sound like an outlier and an accident.
Right. And so that kind of made me think a little bit about the accidental part of it because like some people think this is all nefarious and like these big tech companies are out to get us or something.
Mm,
And what I thought about is, and I think we've probably all seen videos of people who accidentally do embarrassing things on camera in, like work Zoom meetings and
not
stuff.
realizing their video on, or they're still in the meeting, maybe. Yeah.
Right. And I think like I very specifically recall, I think it was in early COVID and it was, like a Zoom work meeting and there was a woman who clearly thought that her camera was off and she went and was using the bathroom. Like she carried her laptop into the bathroom and there she was.
Oh,
I will admit that I don't do it in regular face-to-face meetings with people, but I have on occasion used the bathroom while I'm attending a webinar, like I'm listening to stuff.
it's like a
But
video. Yeah.
so Right. But when I do, I make darn sure that the camera's off, even though I'm not on camera in the meeting.
Physically
Um,
covered. Yeah.
and I
Microphone's probably
cover the
covered.
camera. And even if I've done that, if I'm in the bathroom or something like that, I'm going to make sure that it's turned and facing a different direction
Yeah.
because I'm really
Yeah.
listening to the content. Anyway, but the reality is that like mistakes happen. So even if your device or your search engine or the flashlight app on your phone doesn't intend to record data from your phone, mistakes happen. Like that's just a part of life and people and technology. And I really think that these companies, all of them, probably, I hope, that they do a good job of identifying that these mistakes happen and when they happen, and then they delete the unintended recordings when they happen. And
Mm,
in some cases, they even have to come back and inform you that this happened because of different breach notification
yeah. It's
laws.
a form of a data breach for sure.
Right. So all of these things that you carry around with you, your camera, your microphone, your GPS tracker, I would say that you should assume that these things might, even accidentally, be capturing data about you and, take some responsibility and really recognize that most of the data that they're capturing on purpose is because you've given them consent to do it.
Right. That is a very good point. It's kind of like accidents happen both ways. I think there is, like you're saying, these companies should have pretty good programs in place to make sure that they're identifying when these things happen, reporting them accordingly.
Yeah.
But this, and it's not supposed, I don't think the accountabilities on these are first and foremost, but if you do have measures to help guarantee that doesn't happen, right? Covering up your camera if you're not using it, having the little sliders. Voice, it gets a little difficult, I think, in my perspective, though. And this is why this episode is so interesting. Like my phone is always in my vicinity.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to guarantee that I'm not, having my recording on or on a random phone call. But it's what I can't see and what I can't interact, that microphone being on when I don't think it is, or it being used for another
Yeah.
purpose that maybe isn't spelled out in a privacy policy, right? But it's very complicated, it's there's a lack of transparency, there's accidents that can happen, there's
Right.
activities going on that I don't know about because I don't read the privacy notice. There's a lot going on everywhere here.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's very complicated, and the capability is there, and it's in your pocket or on the desk in front of you. So yeah.
Mm. Do we have a clear
So
answer after all these stories in this episode, though? The question.
So I think so, but I'd rather kind of change the focus of the question. I think we should break the question into three parts. So the three parts of this question about is my phone listening to me, is what for the technology companies, what can they do, what are they doing, and what might they do in the future. So I would say we should look at it from those perspectives.
Agreed. And I think these questions in kind of that order too, are questions we need to keep answering more and more as advanced wearable products
Hmm.
continue to hit the market, and expand all the stuff that can be done. So what can be done?
Yeah, like to your point about wearables, like that's expanding. The what they can do is expanding. So, and right now they can do a lot. Like I said, we all carry around devices that have cameras, microphones, GPS trackers, and we tell them we win, and we tell them who our friends are, what we like to buy, what our interests are through our internet searches. The devices themselves and all of the apps that we install on them ask us for permission. They ask us if they can watch us, listen to us, track where we're going, and track who our contacts are. And collectively, the vast majority of us, we repeatedly tell them that that's okay.
Mhm.
So I think my answer to what technology companies can do is that they can do a lot, and we tell them that they can because
Mhm.
we click OK.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes we want the service. Sometimes it's a little bit of what great term did you bring up earlier? The apathy, can't
Societal
remember
apathy.
societal apathy. Yes, it could
Yeah.
be part of that. So I guess then what are they doing then?
Well, it's clear that anything that uses a trigger word. So if you're going to say, hey Google, or hey Siri, or hey Alexa, is that the Amazon one? I
Yeah.
don't, if you're saying hey to something and it's going to respond to you, then clearly that is listening all the time.
Mhm.
Um, so and at least some of the technology companies publish very specific denials about not listening to conversations for targeted advertising. So they say that we don't, but they acknowledge that we have to listen for that trigger word. So if you want me to say that I don't think that any technology companies are listening to us beyond these trigger words, I'm going to have to decline and say that I don't know that for sure. There's too many companies, there's too many apps on our phones. A lot of these companies, they share information with each other. I really don't think that they need to record our audio. The totality of all of the other information that they have about us is enough. Listening to our audio would give them more, but like one of those other sources that I mentioned, that would be very expensive. So I'll go back to my first point that I think that it's likely that whatever they are doing, it's happening with consent because, like I said, most of us, we don't read the terms of service. We just blindly click OK because we're in a hurry to move on to the next thing.
Right, right. Which, if that's the pattern, it kind of begs to that third portion of your question, what might they do in the future?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to tell. When I was talking to my daughter about as I was planning for this episode, and she asked me if an advertiser were to pay a large enough amount of money to a technology company, like your phone, for example,
Mhm.
would they add a trigger word to their product? So instead of somebody saying, hey, Bob, whatever the thing is, they would insert something else
Mhm.
to respond to. And obviously, I don't know the answer to that if they would accept that or not. But the bottom line is that these companies are in business to make money, and most of their money a lot of the money for sure for a lot of these companies comes from advertisements. So
Mhm.
it's hard to know what they would be willing to do in the future for money, but I mean, the companies exist to make money. I think that in the future, the bigger influence is going to be artificial intelligence, and all of the data that it's going to want to collect to be able to fulfill its mission of all of the things that we can't even envision that it's going to do for us in the future.
Yeah.
So, and what's likely to happen is that they're going to come up with things that are beneficial to us and things that are more convenient for us and the things that we're going to want AI to do for us. And in order for them to be able to deliver those really great things to us, they're going to have to collect more data. Um, and it's going to ask us, like, can we do this with your data? And we're going to say, yeah, I want that new shiny thing.
Hmm.
So we're just going to agree to it more. Um, but I think that AI, the troubling thing is AI is going to be able to use this data that it's collecting for us in much more powerful ways. And they're going to be able to make much more focused and detailed and correct inferences about us. Like if we think
Yeah.
it knows us now, like in the future, it's going to be, whoa.
Yeah, yeah. Now that storage costs and in the actual processing of it, and now that there are clear, I think, user-facing applications that satisfy that convenience element to it. Take like ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah.
It solves the problem that Google really couldn't, or after a while couldn't, after its, bloated search, algorithms, is getting straightforward answers to things that are maybe common knowledge some places, but that you just don't have that direct link to, and it does so in a conversational type of way. So then there's
Yeah.
almost like an entertainment component to it, but a lot to say that the more that those use cases are discovered that utilize AI that does rely on a large quantity of information, it will open up additional applications that satisfy our need for convenience. And we know there's a relationship between convenience and privacy, and it's usually correlated, and the opposite,
Yeah.
less privacy equals more convenience. So I don't see that really ending, but hey, what can we do about it? What do you think?
Well, so one of the sources that I found was it was another YouTube channel. It was from a channel called The Security Researcher. And they posted an episode that was called See Something, See an Ad, Here's Why, or Say
Hmm.
Something, See an Ad, Here's Why. And I'm not going to go into what they
That would
said.
have been
Like
a great title for this episode. Dang it.
Uh, they took it from us. So, and I'm actually not going to talk about what they said about the topic, but at the end of it, they talked about what you can do about it, which is
Mhm,
what your question was. Um, so a couple of things. They said pay attention to privacy notices. They said check the settings on your phone. Beware of applications that have access to your camera, microphone, and location. So like that's pretty obvious, and I think we all know that, but people are
yeah.
are again pretty apathetic about it. Um, it suggested some open source apps that you can use to check the settings on your phone. And I'm not going to endorse these because I don't know anything about them, but it very specifically mentioned companies like Graphene OS, and Lineage 4. So I don't know if they're good. I'm not endorsing them, but those
Mhm,
were things that were mentioned. It said to not mix personal and business work, so don't use your personal phone for work things and vice versa. I'm not so sure about that one. And then very specifically it said to encourage our elected officials to support privacy protecting legislation and practices,
mhm.
which I believe in.
Yeah. I mean, it all sounds like good advice, a lot, which here and there we've talked about our episodes throughout our podcast, but it
Yeah.
is high effort for I'll just say just the average person. So what advice do you have to offer, kind of more for a layman, maybe less so a privacy professional?
Yeah, I mean, I just like overall, I just think that people need to be more aware about what's happening with their data. You need to understand it. You need to care. We should exert more interest and control over it. Like this is all
Hmm.
data that is about you. You own the data. I know the technology companies seem to think that they own it. They don't. Your data is yours. Um, I think. Almost everything that is happening with your data is happening because you're allowing it. And I think that that's going to continue in the future. Like even if legislators come around and they enact new legislation, part of that legislation is going to say that consent is legitimate grounds for collecting and processing data.
Hmm.
So like we're going to be stuck with the same societal apathy. So I think that people you need to understand what's happening and be engaged with the topic. Although like if you're listening to a privacy podcast, you're already engaged with the topic, so I'm probably preaching to the choir. So I guess for anyone who's listening to this, you already get it. So kudos to you. But spread the word. Tell your friends.
Yeah. I I love it. Spread the word. This is a campaign now, right?
Spread the word. That's right. Yes.
Privacy for the people. Well, on that positive note, let's call it a wrap. But before we do, I want you all to know that the information shared throughout this episode is that of our own and not in any way affiliated with our employers or other organizations. These episodes are produced in our own time and are based on our own research and professional opinions. It's a wrap.
Yes, that's a wrap. Thanks, Rachel. And thanks, everyone, for listening. See you next time.
Thanks, John. Bye, everyone.